The situation with John Lennon was not evident to me at the time that he was shot. I didn't know what really happened. I was the chief resident in general and cardiothoracic surgery that night, and I was on call, and the way it worked during those times was that the chief resident would be responsible for anything that happened in the hospital that night. So you would come in and assist the junior residents in doing surgery. You basically had a supervisory kind of a capacity, but you could go home, you were just on call, and if anything happened that they couldn't handle, you'd be called for. That night, I was with my girlfriend, who also was a resident at that time in surgery, and we were at her apartment, and we had finished dinner, and we had made love. It was like just about going to sleep, and about 11 o'clock, and I got a call. The beeper went off, and I answered it, and it was like a typical thing, gunshot wound to the chest. Dr. Veteran, we have a gunshot wound to the chest. We need you now. And the first thing I would want to know is, well, what's the condition of the patient before I run over there? You want to kind of get prepared. And they said, well, Dr. Halloran is opening the patient's chest now, and we need you now. And I said, well, Dr. Halloran was the guy below me, and he was the surgical resident that was in the hospital that night. And being the fact that I was senior to him, he wouldn't really do anything unless it was so absolutely emergent that it couldn't wait. And I knew that he wouldn't do something that dramatic unless it was a really lost cause almost. And so I said, well, if Dr. Halloran is opening the patient's chest now, you don't need me, because the patient's already dead. And they said, no, we need you now. And I didn't know anything other than that. And so immediately I responded, and I got dressed and ran over to the hospital. I was across the street on 10th Avenue at that time. And so I had to run across. I had to come down the elevator to this building. I was probably on the 33rd, 32nd, something up high floor, and came down. And I was dressed in jeans and a pair of, at that time was my favorite, these running shoes, these Adidas running shoes with 3 little green stripes. They were Adidas Country, they called them, and they were one of the first kinds of running shoes or whatever. I just remember having that stuff on, and I ran over to the hospital, and you'd run fast, and then when you'd get there, you'd cross 10th Avenue, go into the hospital, and go up toward the stairway to the emergency room, and when you do something like that, your heart rate gets up, you get really worked up, and but it's not good really to be to have that kind of excitement and be level-headed when you come into the emergency room. So you gradually you run over fast, then you kind of slow down and set your pace. And so I kind of slowed down, then walked up the stairs, and by the time I got into the emergency room, opened the door, I was very collected. I was walking down the hall. This is the old emergency room at Roosevelt Hospital, which was on the corner of 58th and 9th. And I remember walking down the hall, like getting myself totally collected to deal with this thing, whatever it was, and these 2 nurses came walking by me and said, John Lennon. And I looked at them and I thought, that's kind of I just thought that was kind of sick. It wasn't funny. It was like John Lennon was, in England, for all I knew. I didn't know, I absolutely did not even think about it. Even after they said it, I didn't think it was John Lennon. And I walked down. I walked down the hall, turned left into the room, and boom, there was John Lennon lying on this table, naked, with all these people around him. His chest open, and it was like I had this weird kind of a sensation. I felt like all of a sudden I had this flashback to when I was a kid and John Kennedy was shot, and I felt like I was now not watching it on television. I was about 12 years old when Kennedy was shot, and I watched the whole thing on TV, and it had a profound effect on me. And now all of a sudden I was like, in the movie or something, and I also had this kind of irrational. That was then this other thing, which is hard for me to rationalize and explain. It was the sense of Jesus Christ dying, and I don't know why I had that. And, I don't know why that. It's almost embarrassing to say that, but the thing is that happened. And then that was like this, maybe, the few seconds that all happens as a flash, and then boom, you're in there. And then I started to, what's going on, this, that, whatever, and you start overseeing this event, which was, medical resuscitation. The chest was opened, and, blood was being put in him, and basically we're trying to get his heart to go back again. And my position as chief resident then was to oversee the resuscitation effort. And and basically you were very, at that time, being the chief resident, being so involved that you were more skilled and more in tune with all that stuff than just about anybody else. But there were attendings. There was an attending there, and there was another attending that was in charge of the emergency room, was there. And Yoko Ono was in another room, which I never saw her. But so I looked at him, and I mean, you're running this arrest, and it gets kind of mechanical thing, and you order this medication, that medication, and whatever, and you're just trying to keep it going. And but his heart was in an agonal rhythm, which is a kind of a it was a little even, it was like a ventricular fibrillation, but it was even, as I recall, probably worse than that. There was some evidence of life to the heart, but nothing that really was very responsive, and we were very unsuccessful in whatever we did to get him back going again. And had we done that, had we been successful, I'm sure that he would have been brain dead and everything else that went with it, kidneys lost, and it would have been a horrible thing anyway at that point. I think he arrived beyond, beyond resuscitation when he got to the emergency room. And I start, as this is going on, you kind of look and assess everything, and what's going on. I remember looking at his face, and you kind of, there are all these little individual vignettes kind of that happen, in your mind visually. And I remember the refinement of his features. His nose was so refined, and his hair was this kind of a reddish hair, and everything. He was so delicate and pale and thin and incredibly fragile he looked, aside from his vulnerability of having been, shot. He looked just naturally fragile and delicate. And he had, what he had at that time were 4 gunshot wounds to the left side of the chest, 2 that went through his left arm, and that passed through the left arm and went into the chest, and 2 into his left chest just below that, so that and he had 3 exit wounds, 1 in the clavicular area, and 2, kind of mid-sternal on the left side. And basically he had torn through his subclavian artery on the left and had bled to death. That was the big injury, I think, that caused most of the damage, in addition to the other wounds to the lung and spleen and whatnot that he sustained. But anyway, in the course of this, you're looking around, and I noticed that his clothes were in a pile over in the corner, and because somehow, I don't know why, but I was interested in. There was a curious thing that went over me, and I was wondering, well, what did he wear? I don't know why I thought about it, but he had these cowboy boots, and he had these jeans, and he had this like leather bomber jacket with like I think, as I recall, well, I'm not sure if it had a fur collar or not, but it was this leather bomber jacket with jeans and a cowboy boots. And at one point, I remember, I can't remember how this came about, but there was something in one of his pockets or something. There was a thing in one of his pockets, and like an envelope that had photographs, and I looked at it, and it was they were like snapshots from just like knucklehead snapshots from. It may have been, he had recently had a birthday or whatever. It may have been stuff like that, silly little personal nonsense stuff. And so the whole thing had a very, very personal kind of a thing for me. There was like this intimate, personal, and this other sort of at a higher level kind of a experience, that was going on. And anyway, eventually it was, we tried, we put a lot of blood in him and tried to control the bleeding and got a lot of control of the situation, but could not electrically stimulate the heart with resuscitation efforts to get it going again. And so that was that. And after about 20 minutes, I said that, okay, that's it, it's over, and declared him dead. And then we stopped, everybody pulls back, and then you have to do the paperwork. And there was a resident, a junior resident, Lee McBride was the resident. I think she, at the time, sewed up the chest, sew it back up, and just get it ready to go to the morgue, the body. But I remember when when that was over, it was all over, and that's, I guess, somebody went, it might have been the emergency doctor, Dr. Lynn, who ran the emergency room, who was the administrative doctor of the emergency room, walked off, it might have been him, and a minute or two later, I heard this scream in another room, and that was Yoko Ono. And it was like a really, like a chilling kind of scream, and that was it. I never saw her, and the whole thing was completely separated, between John Lennon and her, whatever. I never had anything to do with her other than hearing that scream, which was very upsetting. And then I went home, and I had my sneakers with blood on them. His blood was then on my sneakers, those little Adidas sneakers that I had. And for the next, at that time, as I said before, I was doing cardiac surgery, and one of the cardiac surgeons actually had been had an apartment in the Dakota with him at the time, and had gotten a ride I think, to the hospital or something that day or the day before. It was a really bizarre circle of events and connections and all that. And it sort of preyed on my mind for months after that. And although it didn't seem to bother me externally, I would wake up in the middle of the night with and be depressed. You know, I actually woke up and would be deeply depressed in the middle of the night for no reason. I didn't even understand. It was like a bizarre thing, and it took maybe about 4 or 5 months for that to go away. And also, during that time, whenever I just wear those sneakers, and eventually they, you know, the rain and sweat and wear and tear and all that just washed the blood away. And I eventually just threw those sneakers away. Some people at the time kept things like that as kind of relics or whatever, and I felt that I didn't feel comfortable with that, and I felt more comfortable just doing what I did.